Mark Bell, some of you might know him, started the sugar diet. He's a big-time influencer, historically low-carb keto. Ended up losing a lot of weight doing low-carb keto, and he started posting about the sugar diet. He's saying he's losing fat and not losing muscle, and his exercise performance is fantastic. I'm going to relate this to a new human-controlled trial that was published in one of my favorite journals, Nature Metabolism. Basically, what they did in this study is they took lean, healthy men, so men generally in their 20s, BMI around 25, they put them on a protein-restricted diet that was high carb and generally low fat. So over 5 weeks, what ended up happening is a remarkable 19% increase in total energy expenditure without changes in physical activity. 574 more calories burned when they were eating a high carb, low protein, low fat diet. It's quite remarkable. What I think it is an opportunity to use a viral fad diet to understand really cool metabolism that underlies not just that, but other ways in which we can look at diets, even ketogenic diets. So I think it's a really cool trend. I'm not going to do it myself, but I hope people try to understand it rather than just dismiss it as stupid.
Nick, it's coming up on a year since we last chatted. In that time frame, in the research realm, in the metabolic health realm, what has got you most excited?
First of all, thanks for having me back, Jesse. I can't believe it's been a year. That's freaky. That's a really difficult question to answer because I have the privilege of being a generalist right now. Everything fascinates me. And I wake up, I read Cell Science and Nature, whatever is on tabs. And so any given week, I might have like 4 or 5 things on my radar. So over the course of a year, you can imagine there are like dozens and dozens of topics that come up. So to give you the whole like year breakdown, I just can't do that. I can mention some things that are on my mind as of late. There's a lot of really cool stuff in the heart health realm. So upcoming data on things like Lp(a), which is really hot right now. It's an atherogenic lipoprotein that's thought to be genetically fixed, but there's some innovations in that space. Inter-organ communication, so like how your organs talk to one another, like how your brain and your heart talk, like things that your heart spits off, little packages that literally go to your brain and can change brain function. The sugar diet is probably the biggest viral trend right now. So we can dig into that. It is what it sounds like, people just slamming hundreds of grams of sugar in an attempt to get fit and lose body fat, which seems pretty crazy. But as I say in an upcoming video I have dropping tomorrow, as we record this, I'm the last person to equate crazy with wrong. So there's some really interesting human control trial data in line with that we could explore. Just so many things. I'm happy to start anywhere. What's been piquing your interest?
Well, let's go into the sugar diet. We'll continue on this thread. And this is something I haven't delved into too deeply.
Yeah.
I have a general idea, but let's take it from the very top. You've quickly touched on it, but let's give a broad overview of when this started and what it is.
So apparently it's been something people have been dabbling with for quite a while. It didn't come up my radar as a thing until a couple weeks ago. It came up my radar because an acquaintance, Mark Bell, some of you might know him, started the sugar diet. He's a big-time influencer, historically low-carb keto. Ended up losing a lot of weight doing low-carb keto. And he started posting about the sugar diet. And I think it caught everybody off guard because of who he is, how he's eaten. But he was saying he's having phenomenal results, getting absolutely jacked and shredded, which he is. If you look up Mark Bell, he is absolutely jacked and shredded on the sugar diet. And he was reporting, eating, and this is what he reported to me in like a voice memo. We have a little pen pally relationship. He was eating about 0.5 grams per pound of body weight. He's 209 pounds, so like around 100 grams. Which isn't that much protein. It's pretty low protein, low fat, so like less than 30 grams a day, and up to 800 grams of sugar per day in the form of like fruits, fruit juice, candy. And he was even doing sugar fast, or is actually still doing sugar fast, which is like fruit juice, like candy, soda, actually just sugar. And he's saying he's losing weight, losing fat, and not losing muscle, and his exercise performance is fantastic. Now, I don't know if Mark is the nucleus of the hype. I very well think he could be, but then a lot of people have been trying the sugar diet, posting about the sugar diet. And so after a while, my arm got twisted into looking into like, is there any legitimacy to this? Because it sounds crazy, but often in biology, when you go poking around, the things that sound crazy at least have a nugget of truth to them, which I found out to be the case, surprisingly.
Well, let's keep going deeper. So you've given us the overview. We know there's a lot of sugar. Again, high level, it's moderate to low protein, low fat. What's the physiology happening under the hood?
I'm going to relate this to a new human-controlled trial that was published in one of my favorite journals, Nature Metabolism. I'll just tell people what it is. It's called Dietary Protein Restriction Elevates FGF21 Levels and Energy Requirements to Maintain Body Weight in Lean Men. It was published March 6th, 2025 in Nature Metabolism. So people can go look and read the paper if they want. We can also link a newsletter breakdown I did. But basically what they did in this study is they took lean, healthy men, so men generally in their 20s, BMI around 25, and they put them on a protein-restricted diet that was high carb and generally low fat. So protein was restricted to about 9% of kilocalories, which is a pretty low protein diet. And then what they did was they tried to lock in the subject's weight. And what they found was over the course of 5 weeks, 5-week low protein feeding period, they needed to increase the participants' caloric intake in order for them to maintain weight, with no changes in activity level. So over 5 weeks, what ended up happening is a remarkable 19% increase in total energy expenditure without changes in physical activity. So that equates to, in these participants in the first study, 574 more calories burned when they were eating a high carb, low protein, low fat diet. It's quite remarkable. Now, I will get into the mechanism. Actually, no, I will get into the mechanism straight off, which is what they found was it had to do with this hormone called FGF21. Stands for fibroblast growth factor 21. Name doesn't really make sense for what it does. But what they were able to show in this study is that FGF21, which is primarily released from the liver, signaled to fat cells to what's called uncouple their mitochondria. And what that means is the mitochondria were just less efficient. So they were just like burning off energy, so to speak, about 600 calories, 574 calories per day. Now, just to kind of give a little bit of details on how they measured this, they looked at biopsies of the participants, fat cell biopsies, and saw increases in some components of what's called the electron transport chain in mitochondria. I'll show a lot of visuals in my video breakdown, which you can provide in the notes. And then a decrease in what's called ATP synthase, which is like the waterfall outlet for the potential energy stored in mitochondria. A lot of jargon there. Bottom line is the mitochondria became less efficient or had signs of becoming less efficient, uncoupled in fat cells in humans, and then they coupled it to an animal model study to prove causality. So you can kind of like knock out certain proteins in animals and prove it's a causal pathway. So stepping back at a high level, when you restrict protein, at least in lean, healthy men, that is a qualification, this hormone goes up and it increases energy expenditure. Now, the next question is, well, is it the carbs or is it the protein restriction? And so they did a couple other studies. One, they did a replication of the original study, but in the third study, they swapped the carbs or some of the carbs for fat. So instead of doing a very high carb, low protein diet, they did a low protein diet, but that was 41% carbs, 9% protein, 41% carbs, and then 50% fat, which is pretty crazy if you think about it, because they're basically giving these people like the macro breakdown of, I didn't do the math out, but something like ice cream and brownies, right? And they had the same result. They had this massive increase, a 21% increase in total energy expenditure. And they had to increase their calories by like 600 plus per day or around that to maintain their weight, eating low protein. So based on this study, and there are others that I go over in my content review, it appears to be protein restriction, at least in lean, healthy men, can increase energy expenditure substantially through this FGF21 hormone. So like pausing there and giving a high-level overview that provides some intellectual handhold on how a sugar diet might work. It's not the sugar per se. It's actually the protein restriction. Now, there are more nuances in there, but I want to pause just to kind of like clarify anything that needs to be clarified. What questions pop into your head, Jesse? Because I'm sure they're popping into the head of your audience as well.
Definitely. So first thing, you've mentioned a couple different macro breakdowns.
Yes.
Can we assume, given that any combination of fat and carbohydrate with the lower protein would have the same result?
That is a great question. Now, things get quite nuanced because what's really cool about this mechanism is it actually provides, in theory, a unifying mechanism for how a sugar diet, low protein, super high sugar, low fat, and a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, which is generally also about 9% protein, 1% carb, 90% fat, could both increase energy expenditure and lead to weight loss. Now, in this study, as I mentioned, they did a fat swap for carbs, but it wasn't complete. They went from high carb to 41% carb, 50% fat. So it was actually a carb-fat mix. The increase in FGF1 was the same area under the curve, maybe even a little bit greater with the fat-carb mixture. So if you were to extrapolate from that, you would hypothesize, it is just a protein restriction. And if you did a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, 9% protein, 90% fat, and basically no carbs, you have the same boost. So it's possible. I will say they did not do that in this study. And now here's where things get extra nuanced, is that if you look at the data, if you look at animal models first, actually there is an increase in FGF21 on ketogenic diets, right? So that seems to support it. However, if you then go to human data on ketogenic diets, you don't see the same effect. So then you have to be scratching your chin like, well, what the heck's going on? And there's a couple explanations. One might have to do with FGF21 sensitivity. So let me start with an analogy. Insulin. If you're insulin resistant, it tends to happen with high insulin. If you have obesity and insulin resistance, you have high insulin because your body's trying to compensate. The high insulin doesn't mean you're getting more insulin signal. In fact, you might be getting less because you're insulin resistant. It's the same way with FGF21. Even though this hormone is being explored for its anti-obesity and anti-diabetic properties, including in pharmacological trials, the pharmacokinetics are kind of complex, so they haven't had success. But while giving FGF21 or spiking it acutely can have positive benefits, there's actually a positive association between FGF21 and obesity and BMI. So people with higher body fat have more FGF21. People with more insulin resistance, lower HDL, signs of metabolic syndrome, they have higher FGF21. So if you lose a lot of weight quickly on a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, you might have your FGF21 reduce. It doesn't mean you have less signaling. You just might be gaining sensitivity. And consistent with that, there are studies showing that ketogenic diets can increase the FGF21 co-receptor. It's called beta-klotho. So there's this possibility that there's a uncoupling, not just on the mitochondria, but of FGF21 levels and actually activation of pathways, which makes this all the more complex. I know there's a lot I just threw out there, but I think it's important to step back and recognize how complex these things are to study. And one added element I'll add is hormones fluctuate quickly and rapidly, especially FGF21. So in this particular case, the increased energy expenditure happened in acute periods after eating. So it was in that after feeding period, not the fasted period, but the after feeding period where FGF21 spiked and then signaled to fat cells to uncouple. So this is something I should clarify because people might think, oh, I can protein restrict by fasting, but that wouldn't actually have the FGF21 effect per this study. You need low protein macros. So it is actually the feeding process that is spiking the FGF21. The reason this makes it extra complicated to study is I love doing N=1s, but I can't now go just do a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet and test this on myself because I need to be in a lab with capacity to get serial blood draws over time and look at the arc of the FGF21 after feeding. So a lot there. Stepping back, I would hypothesize that all protein-restricted diets, including 4-to-1 ketogenic diets, increase FGF21 signaling, which suggests an underlying common mechanism. Maybe not a complete mechanism, but a common mechanism by which a bunch of different diets, ranging from the sugar diet to a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, low protein, super high fat, could increase energy expenditure and lead to quite massive weight loss. So pretty fascinating stuff, I think.
When it comes to the research, you mentioned this study that was done earlier this year or published earlier this year. How long was that study? And then has anybody else tried to replicate this?
Yeah. So this study was the Nature Metabolism study. It came out in March. So we're recording now June 5th. So it was, less than about 3 months ago. And nobody's tried to replicate it. It's been such a short time frame. I mean, the kind of work that goes into a study like this, it's years to get like approved, executed, published. So people just haven't had time to replicate it. I will say they did 3 separate experiments in this publication: a low protein, high carb, a replication of the low protein, high carb, and then a low protein, high carb, high fat. I mentioned the macro breakdowns I mentioned them in my descriptions. So I think they did a pretty decent job as far as they could. And the intervention was 5 weeks. Following that, they had a 5-week higher protein period, which I should have said. But basically, when they went from low protein back to high protein, their energy needs went back down. And they needed to reduce their calories again in order to not gain weight. So it was a very fascinating study, but to the point of duration, there are certain limitations, and one of them is duration. Yeah, for 5 weeks, this could work. Will it work in a year? I would hypothesize probably not, at least not with the sugar diet approach. So there are certain qualifications we could add. So first of all, when you're eating a lot of sugar, you're assaulting your liver with fructose. Now, there are hypothetical ways it could adapt, but that could be a problem. And over time could convert into signs of like fatty liver, NASH, MASH, and make you metabolically unhealthy. Now, ironically, your FGF21 levels might rise, but because you're becoming FGF21 resistant. So I would caution against doing this long-term for that reason to start. I'd also add, some people say like, oh, well, there's also data showing that overeating carbs will spike FGF21. And that's true. In addition, so we can look at different studies different ways, but the studies they're referring to also show a massive spike in liver fat growth, over 100% spike, and a giant spike in circulating triglycerides. So you can kind of think of it as, yeah, your FGF21 spikes, but it's because you're having a massive like liver stress response. So probably not a good idea. Additionally, we don't know how this would affect people with pre-existing metabolic conditions, obesity, or women. So the majority of people are metabolically unhealthy. They use lean, healthy men. Would this work for weight loss in somebody who is already overweight or with metabolic syndrome? Probably not, or not as well. Will it work in women? We don't know. So for these reasons, I'd caution, and there's actually data showing or suggesting why it would be very dangerous for people with pre-existing metabolic health conditions. In fact, there's a lot of genetic variation in this FGF21. There are, different alleles, different SNPs, and, for example, one, quote, minor allele, which means it's less common than the common allele, is so common that the minor allele is present in 44.7% of cases. So it's not really minor. It's like half the people. And if you have a modification, again, very common in FGF21, and you're not as good a producer, you will not respond to protein restriction or the sugar diet with the same FGF21 boost. And if you don't, that predicts worse outcomes. This has also been shown in literature. So if you take people and you put them on a low protein diet, in one study I think it was 3% protein, and then like measure their energy output, those with bigger FGF21 spikes will have greater increases in energy expenditure. And that predicts they'll lose more weight or not gain as much weight over time if they stay on the protein diet or low protein diet. So all that's to say, I don't think this generalizes to people with metabolic conditions, obesity, not necessarily women. I don't think it's a good idea over the long term because you probably could convert to some sort of FGF21 resistance. And then on top of that, sugar diet's high risk for being nutritionally deficient. So 5 weeks, you're going to survive. A year, if you're eating Sour Patch Kids as your main intake, you're probably not. So I'm not bashing it per se. I think it's fascinating. And I honestly give kudos to people like Mark Bell, who are willing to experiment on themselves, even if he says, what he says is don't science it, bro. I'm like, dude, you are sciencing it. You developing a hypothesis on yourself and you're testing it on yourself. Kudos. You're not saying you generalize it to everybody, but you're toying with what works for you. So I would be very cautious about it, but I don't want to come off as just like brutally debunking it, because what I think it is an opportunity to use a viral fad diet to understand really cool metabolism that underlies not just that, but other ways in which we can, look at diets, even ketogenic diets, through this like interesting hormonal lens that goes so far beyond things like calories. or at least simple calories in, calories out model. So I think it's a really cool trend. I'm not going to do it myself. But I hope people try to understand it rather than just dismiss it as stupid.
Spinning off of that nutrient deficiency piece, I think that is definitely critical in all of this. But what it gets me thinking about is trying it in a slightly different way, where you still bring the protein down, bring the fat down, or you could, again, play with those macros with the fat and the carbs, but then do it with all healthy carbs. Get rid of the Sour Patch Kids, get rid of the soda. That would be interesting to me to see how that plays out in comparison to what you're talking about.
Great. I could have planted you saying that. To be clear, the study that was done in Nature Metabolism relates to the sugar diet. It did not test the sugar diet. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that. I would say they trended towards more, quote, healthy carbs. In fact, I think the fiber intake was something like 50 or 60 grams, something crazy. But to your point, there's something here. There's something here to low protein intake, which is interesting framed against the high protein trend, let's say. High protein is really big right now. That's, no debate. In fact, I was listening to, I don't know if you heard Chris Gardner on Andrew Huberman. Chris Gardner is a very pro-plant-based researcher. Andrew Huberman had him on to discuss, and Andrew opened with, Chris and I have a lot of discussions. We kind of disagree on protein. And Chris, who I don't think was aware of this study at the time they recorded the podcast, because he didn't bring it up, and I think he would have, tried to make a case for lower protein, which Andrew didn't seem to be sold on. And I honestly sided more with Andrew. Higher protein generally being better, all things being equal. And I'll just say, I didn't find Chris's argument bad. I just wasn't super convinced. But then I read this study. And afterwards, I'm like, oh, shit. He might be right, but maybe not for the reasons he thinks. So genuinely, if people want to read this study or my coverage of it, while it is not going to get me to convert to the sugar diet, it does make me think of protein in a very different way. And I will also add in the study, because I didn't say this before, the participants did not lose any significant amount of lean mass. What ended up happening is they basically were wasting less nitrogen, which makes sense. The body's pretty smart. You get more efficient at using protein if you have less. And hormones like FGF21 might be able to coordinate this. So there very well might be something to having, if you're metabolically healthy, lower protein diets for optimal health and longevity. I'm not saying that's the case based on one study, but this study did really make me think differently about protein needs. So if people can read it, I encourage them to read it. Or if you can't get access, my coverage might serve as a surrogate. It's a really cool study.
Well, an interesting counter. In our world, a lot of times moderate or high protein diets are looked at as being advantageous when it comes to weight loss because they're satiating and the thermogenic effect of consuming higher protein. Yeah. So an interesting twist on a different piece of the puzzle and trying to fit that into all this.
It's one of those things where your mileage may vary, right? At the end of the day, these are cool controlled trials, but if you try a way of eating and it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. It doesn't matter what the control trial, the RCT says. And so there are going to be different people that give different bang for their buck from, say, the thermic effect of food, satiety of protein, or just increased energy expenditure with protein-restricted diets like this. Now, I will be clear. In this sort of study, to get the benefits, you do need to go out of your way to restrict protein to a level that is much lower than most people would eat. So for me, it would be restricting protein to eating a chicken breast per day. And that is all my protein. I can't have eggs for breakfast. I have a chicken breast for dinner. You know what I mean? It's very low protein. So it's not just you're not gunning for protein. It's you have to actively restrict, which isn't easy, to be clear. So this might sound pleasurable, the sugar diet, but I would speculate, like any other extreme restriction diet, it might have unpleasant elements, including social elements. But at the end of the day, it's what works best for you. I could say that there are unpleasant elements of a ketogenic diet, not eating carbs. For me, the health benefits way outweigh the social awkwardness or not getting to eat pasta. So again, your mileage may vary. It's highly individual. Some people, for example, find they do, just in the keto space, better with high protein. Some people feel they do way better when they actually keep the protein a little bit lower and keep the fats higher. I know people that have tried going between high protein keto and 4-to-1 keto, where the protein's low and the fat's high. And they say when they eat high fat and they keep the protein low, they are so much more full. They just can't eat, even though they're eating what some might call, and I say this in a jesting manner, a lower satiety per calorie nutrient, say the butter versus the lean chicken breast. But metabolism is complicated. And if you take nothing else from this conversation, it's that. Metabolism is complicated. The body often works in mysterious ways that vary individual to individual, which I think is the beauty of it. That's what gets me up and excited about exploring things like this. And why when I see Mark Bell slamming Sour Patch Kids, I don't go, dude, this is a dangerous fat. I go, that's weird. And I think a lot of like scientific breakthroughs come from that little observation. Not the eureka moment, but the, that's interesting. How can we see this differently? So sugar diet, a trend. Do I think it's healthy long-term? No. Do I think it has some legitimate science? Yeah, actually.
When it comes to Mark Bell and this paper, what came first? Did Mark get inspired from the paper?
Mark Bell, I asked him, because when I saw the paper, I'm like, wait, is this why you're doing it? And he said, no. Apparently, people have been experimenting with this sort of approach for a while. And the paper, I think it came out before he started, because I think now he's been doing it for something like a couple months. The paper is about 3 months old. So I think it came out just before he started it, but I think it was just a coincidence. He is not also an academic. He is abundantly clear about that. In fact, he's quite critical about people, quote, over-sciencing the human body, which is somewhere where I think we disagree a little bit. But, there's something beautiful to the different points of view. So, no, he was not inspired by this paper. It just kind of happened incidentally.
Have you heard him talk about whether or not this is a short-term or long-term thing?
I should clarify what his plans are long-term. I don't want to misspeak and misrepresent. I think he's an odd guy, but a pretty logical guy. I think if he were to do this longer term, he would include it in some sort of cycle. Maybe like a seasonal cycle, a carb cycle, use it for maybe cutting, and also probably try to reap the benefits of carbohydrate restriction, which is what he's done most of his life. So we'll see. I think he's pretty transparent about how he iterates things in real time. So I'm not sure if he has a plan. I don't think he does for when he's going to terminate this and move on to something else. I think like a lot of people, he just tweaks and then tells people what he's tweaking. But I'll clarify that with him in a couple of weeks. He's popping over 2 weeks from today to Boston. So I think his niece wants to look around Harvard. So he asked me to give him a tour. And so we'll walk around, have some fun.
Is he going to try and get you to eat some Sour Patch Kids?
Yeah, he's not going to get me to do that. I'm done with my carb experiment days. They took a toll. The Oreo was pretty hard. And then I did a bacon and honey one that my history is I've used a ketogenic diet for IBD. So any experiment, and I love to do experiments, but one that includes carbs does risk a flare. And that ended up happening once last year. It was very unpleasant for a while. So I think I'm done rolling the dice. My family, my girlfriend were very mad at me for doing that. But I do really want to do a parallel experiment on a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet. In fact, I've reached out to other people. I don't know if you know Mike Mutzel from High Intensity Health.
Definitely.
And some other people. He's agreed to, with me, do a little crossover trial of our own where we lock in a diet and then swap out protein for either fats or carbs. In my case, I'm going to be going to an isocaloric 4-to-1 ketogenic diet with low protein. I actually have an Excel doc where I'm already tracking things. And so I'm in the like kind of like baseline phase. And then I'm going to see, do I lose weight if I just swap out the proteins for fats isocalorically? I haven't decided if I'm going to try to up titrate the fats in order to maintain weight like they did in this study, or if I'm just going to see how much weight I lose over 5 weeks if I just go full on 4-to-1 keto. Because I've never done 4-to-1 keto for a prolonged period of time. But we'll see. And then I think Mike's going to try it. I have other people I'm trying to get to try this as well. Hopefully we'll get some women as well, because they didn't use women in this study. So if anybody listening wants to do this with us safely of their own volition with no coercion, let me know, because I think it's fun to toy with these things, I think.
It's still early on, but have you seen any N of ones in different camps, women, people that are metabolically unhealthy, trying to lose weight, coming from being obese, and then sharing the results online?
Not with protein restriction as a targeted intervention. Again, this paper is so new, and like, as far as I'm aware, and I might not be, but I think I'm the first one to talk about it. And I only put out my newsletter 6 days ago, and I'm only going to put my video, which is probably going to get more attention tomorrow. So I would predict people are going to start toying with protein restriction and seeing what happens. So I think we will see an outpouring of protein restriction N=1s. I'd be surprised if we didn't. And I don't know when you're going to drop this, but by the time you drop this, maybe, we can prompt people in the comments to go to the comments of this YouTube video and podcast and share their N=1 journey if they've been toying with this. I bet you will get a couple comments.
Sounds good. It'll probably be 2-3 weeks. So
we'll see. I'm definitely going to be toying with it. I know Mike's going to toy with it. We'll see who else we can do to get to play around with it. But it's super interesting. I just wish I could monitor hormones at a more higher resolution time frame. Because again, the FGF21 fasting, getting it every couple of weeks won't help. You just do need serial levels. So yeah, anyway.
Definitely. The other piece to this is when we start bringing the protein down versus, say, going 100% carnivore and dropping the carbs, there are essential amino acids and then essential fatty acids. So it's not like we can drop those down to zero for any extended period of time, at least, because those nutrients are a bit different than carbs.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. You can still, if you think about what are the essential fatty acids, it's like linoleic acid and alpha linoleic acid. EPA and DHA are probably better, but you don't need that much of it. You could eat 10 grams of fat per day and get all your essential fatty acids. You'd have to be pretty deliberate about it, but you could. Essential amino acids, if you're eating animal-based proteins, you're going to get them. In fact, basically all protein sources, including plant proteins, to be honest, have all 9 essential amino acids. The ratios are a little bit different. The bioavailability might be lower if you're eating a low protein. So I do think if you were doing a protein-restricted diet, animal-based proteins are probably going to give you more bang for your buck. But these things could be formulated in very thoughtful manners. Like any restricted diet, there's a risk for nutrient deficiencies. I think a sugar diet is very high risk. But all these protein-restricted diets could be formulated in ways that are completely nutritionally complete.
Before we move away from this piece, last part I want to get your thoughts on is glycation. Have we looked at HbA1c of Mark or anybody else that's tried this?
I don't think Mark has reported his A1C, not to my awareness, nor do I think he's wearing a CGM, which he's going to come to Boston. I'm going to have to remember to give him a Dexcom. I have some. I'm going to see if I can get him to wear a Dexcom and see what happens. I would predict I predict some serious excursions. That said, it differs for different people. He's huge and muscular, so he has a lot of glucose sink. A lot more than me in terms of just muscle volume. So he might not have these crazy spikes. It's hard to say, but no, people have not looked at glycation. So we'll have to see. Incidentally, I have another video coming out. There is a new study on different cooking methods and glycation in food, advanced glycation end products. So people can look out for that. Akon was a little, anyway, that aside. It's how to cook eggs, but there's a tie-in with the story of me meeting Akon the rapper in India. Had some weird experiences over the last year or so. There's a point when me and him were talking about eggs and a birthday party in India. And it's in part what inspired that video. But now I'm going on a tangent. We should probably wrap up sugar diet chat. And then what's next on our agenda?
Well, before we do that, I agree with the sugar diet. Can you give us high level what you're going to share in that video?
The sugar diet video.
The one about the cooking and the eggs.
Oh, yeah. So at a high level, and this is a spoiler alert, I hope people still watch it, but advanced glycation end products are what happens when sugars bind to fat or proteins. And they're associated with, and can actually cause to some extent, oxidative stress, inflammation, and chronic diseases. And different cooking methods create advanced glycation end products at different levels. Something called the Maillard reaction, people might have heard of it. It's like that brown crust on things. So if you get a good fried egg or a good grilled cheese or roasted potatoes or a marshmallow, that's the Maillard reaction. It's super tasty, but it does generate these advanced glycation end products, which can be metabolically damaging. And so the egg video is going over a new randomized controlled trial looking at how changing cooking methods changes advanced glycation end products circulating in the blood. There are a couple plot twists that I will tease. There's one major flaw with the study, but it actually reveals a pretty interesting underlying truth. about what matters when it comes to AGEs. And there's something that matters a lot more than cooking method. So I'll just leave that to tease people. But I will say that there are major differences in the AGEs you'll generate eating eggs in different ways. Like, one way of making eggs might have AGE levels at 100 kilunits per 100 grams. Another one might have it at 92,000. So there are variations depending on how you cook your eggs, what you serve them with. And there are also biohacks you can use to lower AGEs, like adding lemon juice to animal proteins, marinating or mixing it in, can actually lower AGE production by about 20%. So I go over all that in the video. It has a pretty fun hook since it's all about eggs. And based on my prior video experiences, people click on egg videos.
Nice. Well, we don't want to totally spoil it, but given what you learned from that research, how are you currently cooking your eggs?
I tend to do a light scramble on low heat in macadamia nut oil after blending lemon juice into the eggs. If I'm going to treat myself, I will cook the eggs in heavy cream, which I've just gotten into. That's just a taste thing. It tastes good because the heavy cream caramelizes. I don't know what the AGE content on that is. And I might be trading in my bacon for steak strips. You'll find out why in the video.
Cool. We'll link it up in the show notes.
Yeah, not sure when it's going to come out. It might come out well after this, to be honest.
We'll link it up in the future then.
Great.
Okay, other areas you mentioned in the opening, Lp(a). And I know in your Substack you wrote that you were screwed genetically, I think by your dad, in that realm. So talk about what Lp(a) is, and then the genetic tie-in.
So Lp(a) is the new hotness in the cardiology world. What it is effectively an LDL particle, but it has a little tail. So to describe what an LDL particle looks like to generate our foundation, it is a sphere with this primary protein, ApoB, that helps give the LDL particle structure and function, and then there's like fats and cholesterol in the LDL. Now, Lp(a) differs because in addition to the ApoB, there's something called apolipoprotein A, which is like a little tail, and it's attached to the ApoB. Your a little tail on this Lp(a), the apolipoprotein A, is coded for by the LPA gene. And there are a lot of variations in this gene. There are a thing called Kringle repeats, and the number of repeats you have in your genetic code determines how long the tail is and how much Lp(a) you're producing. So generally, fewer Kringle repeats, a shorter tail, means your Lp(a) is going to be higher. And it might be because longer tails lead to degradation in the liver before secretion. So Lp(a) is thought to be about 90% genetically fixed. I got mine from my dad. I got few Kringle repeats, which means I have high Lp(a). Mine runs around 160, I believe, which is in the really shitty zone. And there's very little I can do to change it. I can modify my LDL with lifestyle about 5-fold or more. I've had a really hard time budging my Lp(a). Now, Lp(a) is thought to be about 6 times as atherogenic on a per particle basis as LDL. And the way it's thought to promote a cardiovascular risk, there's a few ways. But one way is by binding to clots and kind of perpetuating their growth. In fact, there's a really interesting hypothesis that was brought about by Linus Pauling, who won not one, but 2 Nobel Prizes. And his hypothesis had to do with Lp(a) being a substitute and a surrogate for vitamin C. So I know this is going on a tangent. I promise I'll bring it back. But a lot of mammals can produce vitamin C. And vitamin C helps with wound healing. But about 40 to 60 million years ago, our primate lineage lost that ability. It's a mutation on a gene called GLO. So we can't make vitamin C. And sometime after that, we generated the ability to produce Lp(a), which, like vitamin C, can basically promote wound healing, which is good in an evolutionary context because you won't bleed out and you might have better reproductive fitness. The cost is if it's causing clots to grow in your vessels, you could have higher rates of cardiovascular disease. So it's kind of a trade-off that evolution does. There's a lot of examples of this. It's called antagonistic pleiotropy. the fancy term. But bottom line, there's an evolutionary rationale. It might be that Lp(a) is a surrogate for vitamin C since we can't make our own. Now, this is a really interesting point. If this were the case, you might expect the other animals that can make vitamin C don't have Lp(a). Tends to be true. Not only that, but the other animals that can't make vitamin C, like old world primates and humans, another example is guinea pigs, or the European hedgehog, they do make Lp(a). So there's this interesting convergence. Bottom line, Lp(a) is thought to be an adaptation to promote wound healing and also like clot growth. In the current context, it can cause or exacerbate cardiovascular disease. There are other reasons it can do this, including its relationship to oxidized phospholipids, but at a high level, you can think about it that way. And for a long time, it wasn't the big focus because there was nothing we could do about it. Now, people can disagree with this statement, but a lot of medicine, the spotlight of medicine, is driven by economics. There are now 5 big drugs in development to lower Lp(a), some lowering it as much as 99%. So I think that's probably why it's become a center of cardiology discussions now, because we're on the cusp of being able to modify it with medications. And there's still a lot of question over things that we can do lifestyle-wise to potentially alter Lp(a) risk. So we can talk about that. I was surprised, I'll just say before I pass it back to you, with how popular that letter was. It was my most popular newsletter of about 100 to date. And it seems like a niche thing. I'm like, I wouldn't expect the general public to know about Lp(a), but people were fascinated. So about a quarter of people have high Lp(a), and it seems to be a topic of even general public interest. So I'll pause and get your reactions and questions.
Okay, so highly genetic.
Yes.
Given that, is it the type of thing we only need to test one time for?
People say that. So the guidelines, I think, European, United States, like India, China, like a lot of country guidelines say everybody should be tested once. But after that, it's genetically set. So current guidelines say you test once.
Okay, given what we're about to get into, I'm hoping practical steps to influence it and bring it down.
Yeah.
Although we can't, it sounds like, change it a whole lot. That would allude us to believe that testing again would make sense.
Yeah.
Let's get practical. Somebody like you, obviously you have an interest more than others in this as somebody that has a high level. What is it you're doing practically to control or bring that down?
This is something I'm very new to. I will drop a whole newsletter on vitamin C for heart health, which relates to Lp(a). In fact, I'm going to drop it 2 days from when we're recording this. That provides a lot of practical information. But I want to frame this by saying guidelines say test once. The existing high rigor trials say there's not much you can do about it. But what is evidence-based and what is biological reality are 2 hugely different things. And so guidelines aren't going to recommend things where there's not rigorous trials, and rigorous trials on things that don't make money probably aren't going to be conducted, at least not as much and as frequently. So what that means, what I'm implying, is there's a huge area of unknown with respect to how we might be able to modify Lp(a). A few things I'll hit off the bat. Higher saturated fat tends to lower Lp(a). It increases LDL, it does. And so I'm not going to provide a judgment on the net effect, but higher saturated fat intake does tend to lower Lp(a). Additionally, niacin, which is a B vitamin, can lower Lp(a). This is known in the literature. It's not recommended because there haven't been clinical benefits proven. And like anything, there can be off-target and negative consequences. So I'm not using niacin, although I know some cardiologists who recommend it, and it can lower Lp(a) by about 25%, I think, on average. Also, while statins increase Lp(a) by about 30%. Actually, no, I think the meta-analysis showed 10 to 20. Scratch the 20, 30. I think 10 to 20 for statins. PCSK9 inhibitors, which are another medication, can lower Lp(a). So there are a lot of things I just mentioned I want to review. Saturated fat can lower Lp(a). Niacin can lower Lp(a). PCSK9 inhibitors can lower Lp(a). Statins tend to increase them. That's not to put a net value judgment on any of those things, just what the literature shows. But what I find more interesting than that is vitamin C. I mentioned Linus Pauling had this hypothesis about vitamin C or Lp(a) being basically a surrogate or replacement for vitamin C. So you might hypothesize that if you like high dose vitamin C, it might have some benefits. The benefits probably would not be exerted by lowering Lp(a) per se. And the trials don't show that's the case. But there are ways in which it might make Lp(a) less sticky. So basically less able to bind to clots. So even for the same Lp(a) level, you might have less atherogenicity. And there's some animal model data to suggest that would be the case. And if you want me to complete the story of the protocol I'm going to try, I'll add one more element, which is lysine. So lysine is an amino acid, part of proteins. And the way Lp(a) actually binds, basically it's like if you think of like a rock climber, this is the like handhold onto which the Lp(a) rock climber holds, is lysine binding sites. Lysine binding sites to lysine. That is the connection. And so if you provide lysine, like exogenous lysine, you supplement this amino acid, there's some idea that it can basically block the lysine binding sites and also make Lp(a) less sticky. So the combination, I described this in the newsletter coming out in a little bit more detail with references, and we can link that. The combination of vitamin C, probably dosed at around 1 to 2 grams, so 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams per day, and lysine at around 2-ish grams, might make Lp(a) less sticky. And it also might change levels of related molecules, like an inflammatory molecule called IL-6, which might synergize with Lp(a) to lead to worse outcomes. So even if you're not reducing Lp(a), you're reducing the damage, hypothetically, from Lp(a) by making it less sticky and reducing other molecules that perpetuate the damage done by Lp(a), if that makes sense. It's very speculative because it's very hard to study. It would be hard to do a study in humans. And also, what are you exactly measuring? Because it's like it's not just the Lp(a) level. It's so much more complex than that. They've actually shown in animal models that if you supplement vitamin C, it can reduce the accumulation of Lp(a) in arteries. Thing is, you can't do that study on yourself or with your doctor because they need to do a dissection of your arteries and then stain that. So the circulating levels might not reflect how much is actually accumulating in the arteries. So all that said, given my high Lp(a), I am experimenting with a vitamin C lysine combination at 1 to 2 grams vitamin C and 1 to 2 grams lysine. All the details will be in my newsletter on that topic. I might be able to do some serial testing on things like oxidized phospholipids, IL-6. We will see, but very interesting topic. And exploding area in cardiology and lipidology with a lot of avenues for practical lifestyle innovation, I think.
Okay, you've made it clear it's not about just bringing that number down, Lp(a). You touched on a couple markers it sounds like you're going to look at when you do this experiment.
Yes.
I'm assuming you're going to test before and after Lp(a) as well.
Mm-hmm. We'll see. I mean, if it lowers, great. I just
it's
don't.
Part of the picture, right? Again, not the whole picture.
It's worth measuring. It's just about what I would predict. So I don't predict it to change, but if I do this, I will measure it. So I'm just exploring how exactly I want to do it.
What will the total array of tests be before and after? And what to you will determine success?
I would say the key things to look at for me will be interleukin-6. Interleukin-6 is an inflammatory molecule that synergizes with Lp(a) to exacerbate plaque development. So seeing IL-6 go down will be good. I will say my inflammation markers at baseline are probably low. So I'd just like to see a low IL-6 overall. If it's very low to start, it might not go down. If it's elevated to start, I'd like to see it go down. Oxidized phospholipids. So part of the harm of Lp(a) might have to do with the fact that it carries a lot of damaged polyunsaturated fats, oxidized phospholipids. You can think of it as like a reservoir for oxidized phospholipids. In fact, if you reduce oxidized phospholipids, even at higher Lp(a) levels, there's some suggestion that you reduce the harm. So part of the damage from Lp(a) might have to do with these oxidized polyunsaturated fats. So if you provide antioxidants, including vitamin C, there's data showing it should lower oxidative stress and maybe lower oxidized phospholipids. So I'd like to see OXPLs, oxidized phospholipids, go down. I will also measure oxidized LDL. I don't expect it to go down as much just because of a nuance of like what the test is actually measuring. But markers of oxidative stress broadly. There are a lot of those you can get in MDA, oxidized phospholipids, OXPL. But I think the OXPL is most interesting. So I'd like to see that go down. I'll also get an Lp(a), and we'll see what happens with it. Those are the main ones. Obviously, things like a general lipid panel as well. And maybe some other markers of inflammation, general markers like an hsCRP. But I think the interesting ones are IL-6, Lp(a), and oxidized phospholipids. So if people want to do N=1 on themselves kind of thing, those are the things I'd probably get measured. I am exploring actually developing a platform of my own where people can do, get tests in a safe and guided manner. We'll have a bunch of clinicians working on the platform once it launches, probably later this year, maybe early next year. But yeah, I mean, vitamin C and lysine is pretty inert. If people want to play around with it. The physiology is quite fascinating. So if people have high Lp(a), what I'd ask them to do is just engage with the content that I and others will be producing around it. If you ask questions, share your insights from your own tests, self-experiments, whatever. It's a discussion that I think needs to be had and amplified. And I'd love to be part of that discussion. I'm still early to learning about it, but it's very cool and super relevant to, just heart health.
As you share this story and the fact that it's very genetic,
mm-hmm.
the fact that this is involved in clotting gets me thinking about another piece that could be an action piece for people, which is getting metabolically healthy.
Yes.
And then protecting the arteries that way. So we're not creating damage for the Lp(a) to go and attach to and cause a clot.
Yeah. So I think people, if they don't know me, even from this conversation, they're going to know I love to get into the nitty-gritty and the nuances. It's also true that it's important to step back and realize the big picture, which is metabolic health is fundamental to overall health and metabolic diseases, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease. So if you do get your metabolic health in check, however, whatever lifestyle you use to get there is going to be your biggest bang for your buck. Everything else is just details and tweaking. But since we're on the topic of metabolic health and heart health, there was actually there are two other interesting findings in the heart space that I want to bring up related to metabolic health. One has to do with something called myeloperoxidase. Myeloperoxidase is another test you can get. So you can go and get this test measured. It's a biomarker of oxidative stress, and it's an enzyme in and of itself. And one thing it does is it oxidizes LDL inside arteries. So it can create damage that way. But a new study showed that not only does it create damage to the artery from the inside out, like from the inside of the lumen, but outside in. So there is fat around your arteries. It's called perivascular adipose tissue, PVAT. And if you have obesity, myeloperoxidase in the fat around your arteries has damaging effects, including decreasing energy expenditure, decreasing fat browning, and also decreasing levels of a hormone called adiponectin. And what this does is it actually ends up making your arteries stiffer. So just one more way we're discovering how poor metabolic health harms your arteries. There's a lot of complex ways we can explain this. One analogy I was using, we'll see if it lands with your audience, is like some of these hormones, say adiponectin, it's kind of like a yoga class for your arteries. And you want your arteries to be limber and elastic. And so basically having obesity, having myeloperoxidase production in these fat cells around your vessels is like kicking your blood vessels out of yoga class. But you can lower it by improving your metabolic health, including losing excess body fat. And then the other finding, which is super fascinating, is a new study came out showing how the heart talks to the brain. So like literally, if you have plaque in your arteries, there are these things called foam cells. Foam cells are like angry immune cells, angry macrophages. The analogy I've been using for that is Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Bruce Banner, kind of a chill guy, nice guy. You make him angry, he turns into the Hulk, just smashing up, in this case, your cardiac architecture. So foam cells are like the Hulk. They're angry. And one thing they do is send angry messages to the brain. So foam cells in your heart's arteries will spit out little packages, little spheres, literally little spheres that contain messages called microRNA. They will cross the blood-brain barrier, go to immune cells in the brain, cause metabolic dysfunction, glucose irregulation, and inflammation by activating microglia in the brain. So when I say there's a direct effect of your heart on the brain, it's not just poor vasculature. It's like literally cells in a diseased heart will send messages in little packages to the brain to cause metabolic dysfunction. That is how integrated our organs and generally metabolic health are, which is you don't need to understand the details. You do need to be awestruck by how cool that is. Because when you appreciate that's the kind of way our body works, then you stop thinking about like a single organ system that you're trying to target through like a little tweak and start thinking about caring about your whole overall metabolic health.
While we're on this topic of the heart, let's bring in your latest post on Substack, talking about the connection between coffee and the heart and chlorogenic acid.
Chlorogenic acid. So chlorogenic acid is a compound in coffee. It has a lot of effects. Actually, speaking to this heart-to-brain crosstalk, one thing it does is it kind of, in simple terms, intercepts the message. So chlorogenic acid might activate something called the NRF2 pathway, which might help protect the brain from a damaged heart. And there are other studies now, actually human randomized control trials, showing that chlorogenic acid and coffee containing chlorogenic acid can improve blood vessel function. Something called flow-mediated dilation, how well your blood vessels flex to increase blood flow. So in my post from this morning, I went over 2 human randomized control trials showing that chlorogenic acid and coffee rich in chlorogenic acid improves blood vessel function in humans. And then there was a really cool mouse study reviewed in the newsletter, and I'll make a video on it as well, showing that chlorogenic acid at high doses protected against atherosclerosis, so plaque development. They actually did a study in mice predisposed to heart disease, and gave them chlorogenic acid at 2 different doses, a placebo control, or just, I guess, a control diet. You don't really need to placebo a mouse, or a statin. And even though the statin lowered LDL more, the chlorogenic acid protected against plaque development just as much in this mouse model. The mechanism probably had to do with 1, reduced inflammation, 2, preventing this foam cell from developing, and then actually helping with cholesterol efflux. So there are human data supporting chlorogenic acid being heart healthy, and then mouse data showing that it also might be heart healthy. So the headline, good news, is coffee is probably pretty good for your heart. If you want the biggest bang for your buck, the practicals, there are higher chlorogenic acid levels in lighter roast coffees or unroasted green coffee, since the roasting process tends to break it down. So light roast or green coffee. And then another source that's becoming popular is yerba mate. So I have one brand I prefer. I do have an affiliation with them now. It's called Unimate. One of the reasons I like them is, unlike other brands that I know, they actually have published their chlorogenic acid levels and compared them to competitors, and they're quite high, about 600 milligrams in a pack, and they're pretty good. So you can check them out if you want. If you don't, just go for the learning. But chlorogenic acid's another sexy compound that's good for heart health. And if you like coffee, well, I just rationalized your coffee habit, so that's good. Ooh, one other thing, though, that's important. Timing of coffee. So a new study came out in the European Heart Journal that it was an observational study, but it was looking at the relationship between coffee intake and both all-cause mortality and cardiovascular-related mortality. And what they found, interestingly, was more coffee intake up to, I think it was greater than 3 cups per day, was dose-dependently related to lower all-cause mortality and lower cardiovascular-related mortality. So more coffee, good, right? But that relationship was only true in the people who were morning coffee drinkers only, rather than throughout the day coffee drinkers. Why this is, we don't know. If it is a true relationship, there are a couple explanations. One, obviously, caffeine later in the day might mess up your sleep. That's kind of obvious. Even if you're the same hours in bed, reporting the same, hours of sleep, it can change the melatonin peak and ultra sleep quality. That's not as interesting. What I think is more interesting and very possible is your body operates on a circadian rhythm. A lot of things are circadian. They ebb and flow, including inflammation. And a lot of inflammatory molecules peak early in the day. So it might have to do with timing the intake of coffee's polyphenols, including chlorogenic acid and its metabolites, at a point when they can have maximal impact because of when inflammatory signaling is happening in your body. I'm not saying that is for sure the case, but I thought it was pretty fascinating. That was brand new 2025 data that, yeah, if you're going to be a coffee drinker, more is better if you drink it in the morning.
I would assume, but you can clarify, in the mouse study, was that an isolated compound? I'm assuming they didn't give them coffee or yerba mate tea.
The mouse study was, I think the doses were 200 milligrams per kilogram or 400 milligrams per kilogram of chlorogenic acid in the mice. The human studies did, to be clear, coffee at different chlorogenic acid doses. The one RCT, I'm just pulling this out of my head, I think it's correct, 89 milligrams or 310 milligrams. The other RCT, there were three different doses, a 302, a 604, and a 906. Which actually adds an interpretive complexity, I'll just say for a moment, because in the human studies, about the 300 milligram dose seemed optimal. And in fact, there were diminishing returns at higher doses. But the mouse study had much, much higher doses. So, with the human studies, it looks like there's like a little bit of a U-shaped curve, which is actually pretty common for polyphenols. That's not irregular. But in the mouse study, higher levels tended to be more beneficial. In fact, both were high dose, but there was a higher dose. And the higher dose, the 400 milligrams per kilogram, was more cardioprotective. And the reason I call this, I called it, I think in the letter, an interpretive tension, is because you look at the human data and you're like, 300 milligrams, good. And humans are humans and mice are mice. So you're probably inclined to go with the human data. But the outcome in the mice, atherosclerosis, which you can't really test in a human randomized control trial, matters more. So what do you end up going with? And this is one of those places in science with interpretation where there's not a clear answer. My take, shooting for 300 milligrams, which is like 2 to 4 cups of coffee, or in this case, half like a Unimate stick, would probably be pretty good, but I'm not afraid of higher levels. So I won't avoid having a whole stick with 600 milligrams, for example. But that's one of those areas where I can't say perfectly what the dose should be. But to finish my thought, you were asking about coffee in the mice. They did not give mice coffee. In the human trials, they gave coffee and decaf coffee and isolated chlorogenic acid in different experiments, and all had the effect. So it does appear to be the chlorogenic acid in the coffee, and you don't need caffeinated. Decaf works.
You just shared what I was trying to tease out. If it's just the molecule itself, can we just supplement, especially for people that are more sensitive to caffeine?
Yeah.
And you mentioned decaf there too. So decaf work just as well?
Decaf, and then anything that gives less jitters. Yerba mate people, I don't need to be a salesperson for this, just people report less jitters. That's a lot of the time why they substitute coffee in. Has lower caffeine levels overall, higher levels of theobromine, also in dark chocolate. So you can supplement, you can try substituting the coffee for the tea made from a South American shrub, this new fatty tea. Not fatty, fatty as in it's trendy. Actually, I joked because people were poking me about trying it. Huberman made it popular because he was always talking about it. And I'm like, I don't want to try it. I don't want to like it because I'm an old curmudgeon on the inside. I'm 29 on the outside. I'm like curmudgeon on the inside. And I don't like trends just because they're trends. But then I ended up liking it. So, it is what it is. Despite my best efforts to hate it. But yeah, you can supplement. That should work. I would not hyperdose it, but I would say 300 milligrams of chlorogenic acid. Not going to hurt you. Could help you. So, yeah.
Earlier, you quickly mentioned the inclusion of heavy cream. I think that's new for you. Since it's been almost a year, on a micro and a macro level, how has your diet changed?
It's always changing. I still eat on balance, pretty low fiber diet. It's better for my GI system. I don't think fiber is bad for you, to be clear. It's just better for me. I still eat a ton of olive oil. I would say my diet's skewed towards monounsaturated fat overall. although I'm definitely not afraid of saturated fat. I eat a lot of fish. I maintain that high omega-3 intake, especially from fish, is very important. In fact, I'm doing a dive into this for upcoming content because there's this discrepancy in the literature where typically omega-3 supplements don't work that well, but fish intake is well known to reduce risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. And one of the reasons might have to be the form of the omega-3. We can get into that. It's called phospholipid bound or lyso omega-3s, lyso DHA. So I would say even better than supplementing, you should eat fatty fish. Ideally low trophic level fish. I do a lot of salmon and sardines, especially sockeye salmon. It's higher omega-3, higher astaxanthin. So a lot of fish, a lot of eggs. People ask if I get sick of eggs. I never get sick of eggs. A lot of cheese is probably where half of my dietary budget goes. I like cheese. People have different rules for like money. For example, my girlfriend has a rule that money doesn't count and calories don't count in an airport. My rule is money doesn't count when it comes to cheese. I just love it too much. It's too much of a life pleasure. In fact, we were just in Paris. I just got back from Paris and we were walking around. There was one lunch where there was like a cheese vendor in the street. I spent $70 on a block of cheese. They asked me if he should vacuum seal it. It had truffles like in it. It was a truffle goat cheese. It was so good. Or maybe a sheep cheese, truffle cheese. And I'm like, no. I walk around with a block of cheese in Paris, just like smashing that cheese. So a lot of cheese. It brings my life pleasure. And beyond that, yeah. I'm not like, I used to be an adventurous eater. At this point, I just kind of eat what I like to eat. And then the cream is new because typically I keep low A1 casein. So cow dairy, most of it is A1, which can be inflammatory and cause GI upset for some people. Historically, it has for me, so I tend away from A1 dairy. I do make an exception for cream, not for any metabolic health reason. It's just because I've gotten used to putting it in things and I really like it. And it doesn't seem to be causing too much issues for me. So like sometimes I'll like fry some eggs in cream just because it's freaking delicious. I honestly, sometimes I do is I take a little bit, just a little bit of stevia at the end and drip it in and put a little bit of vanilla in it. It's so good. I'm not even a person with a sweet tooth, but there's something about a tiny bit of stevia, a tiny bit of vanilla, cream that is caramelized, and eggs that if you do it just right, I don't know. It's one of my like treats to myself. So sue me if it's not. Ideally metabolically healthy, but my perspective on metabolic health is you're never going to be optimal, and you have to figure out what is optimal for your quality of life balance. And that's individual for everybody. So I'm not always optimizing for lower exogenous AGE content or a fat profile or having my proteins just right to spike my FGF21. I like exploring these things, but at the end of the day, they're all knowledge tools for people to implement as they see fit. And at some point, if you just want to have cream eggs or like an ice cream with your kid, there's nothing wrong with that, not in my opinion.
Somebody right now on the far end of the continuum of metabolic health, they're overweight, they're inflamed. For you, is it ketogenic diet all the way for that person to regain metabolic health if they want to pull the biggest lever and get back quickly? Or are there other considerations in that realm?
Yes and no. I would say yes in terms of, for most people, efficacy. No in terms of effectiveness per se. So the distinction between efficacy and effectiveness, efficacy is like under ideal conditions, what works the best. I think there's a lot of literature showing carbohydrate restriction for people with obesity and metabolic syndrome can be tremendously beneficial. Weight loss, fat loss, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular health. But effectiveness is, well, how well does it really work in the real world? And I don't presume to know an individual circumstance. So if there's someone who is not going to be able to restrict carbohydrates for whatever reason, habitual, cultural, financial, circumstantial, if it's not going to work for them, then they shouldn't crucify themselves trying to get there. I do think generally sugar restriction, sugar diet be damned, is helpful. So I would say the place to start is getting rid of sweets in the diet. Processed sweets especially. Really the biggest lever you can pull is eating a mostly whole foods diet. I don't think it matters if you skew more plant-based or more animal-based, if you're eating, eggs and salmon for breakfast, or if you want an avocado and some tempeh. I really kind of agnostic. Depends on your preference. But I do think getting rid of sugar and processed foods as a heuristic, as a guideline, is the single biggest lever you can pull. I say this, and as I say it, I'm keenly aware of ways in which some of my messaging might even seem hypocritical on this, because there are times when I want to speak in the form of heuristics and generalities, because I think it resonates with people. But I also want people to appreciate there are always exceptions. The sugar diet conversation we had earlier today was an exception. Even when I say don't eat processed foods, it's like, well, what is processing really? Are processed foods per se bad? And the answer to that is technically no. But if you want the simple guidelines, for most people, most of the time, getting rid of foods with labels that are processed is going to do you better. And it's generally not going to do harm. So I think starting there, and then knowing, and the reason I bring this up is knowing that your approach isn't locked in. It can change, it can adapt. So you might have a phase for a year or two where you don't eat any sweets. And then maybe you start toying with keto baking or very particular convenient processed foods that are well formulated. And if you engage in the education journey, in the metabolic health journey, if people are listening thus far to me rambling, that they're already doing that, they will learn tools, tips, and techniques that will kind of advance them from novice level to intermediate and to advanced. And so I think that's all our goal here as science communicators, science conversators, and just to teach people so they can figure out what works in their own life.
Looking at your N of 1, inflammatory bowel disease, I'm just giving a little bit of pushback on that last statement you shared there about cutting out sugars and processed foods.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree, though, somebody in that boat, metabolically unhealthy, having a health challenge like that wouldn't have been or wouldn't be at this point near enough to keep you in remission?
You're 100% right. So that is a good counterpoint. It depends what you're trying to treat. I guess I had in my mind when you posed the question, just like run-of-the-mill obesity, in which you don't need ketosis. I would say for certain conditions, ketogenic diets are therapeutic. And when I say ketogenic diets, I mean not just low carb, but you are in ketosis. That was true for me. If somebody has schizophrenia, depression, maybe certain autoimmune conditions, circulating ketone bodies from going very low carb might be therapeutic. So to your point, extreme diets can be beneficial in extreme circumstances. I think people should appreciate it's not necessarily an all or nothing. However, if you're dealing with something that's quite extreme, you might have to go pretty far to heal it. I did. I had tried a lot of quote, healthy eating patterns, whole food eating patterns, and they didn't work for me. You're 100% right. And it wasn't until I got to the extreme point of a ketogenic diet, quote unquote extreme, that something did click. So don't be afraid of that either. I just opened up the, I guess, lower friction concept first. But if that's not working for you, it doesn't mean that nothing will. You're right. It means you might just need to go a little bit farther.
The challenge, I think, with our health as a whole today in the West is that the number is over 90% right now that are metabolically unhealthy.
Yeah.
And we're in a position now where the norm is for somebody to be overweight. Maybe I'm just, again, at this point, throwing out numbers, but 30, 50 pounds, that's not uncommon. And to me, if you're at that point, that means something major has gone wrong. And if I'm in your shoes, I'm wanting to know what the biggest levers to pull are. And that's why I want to be a bit more radical pushing back here, because I feel like as a whole, our population right now is so sick and we've accepted sickness as the norm. And I want people not just to put one toe in and not get the results, because this is so in our control from the people I've talked to, yourself included. Like, we have so much control here, and I want people to have the information they need to give this their all and to actually cause the changes that are going to change their lives.
So I think it's about how do you inspire that change? Because I agree. I think most people are capable of incredible change, and they don't realize it. Now, from my limited personal and clinical experience, one thing I have learned is you can't force it down someone's throat. The best way to do it is probably lead by example and plant the seeds. So as much as sometimes I see someone and like you, I want so badly for them to be healthy. And I want them to just jump in head first, no wading in, because I know if they do that and they stick with it, they're going to have results. However, I also know that if I tell them to do that, if I instruct them to do that, they will never do it. And you can't want it more than the patient. So the best thing you can do is provide people information and lead by example. So at the same time, I'm saying, look, you don't need to go whole hog. I'm also saying, well, this is what I lived. I did go whole hog, and I needed that. And people can draw from that what they will. So I think it's just about like how you communicate to people where they are. And that's kind of the art of, sometimes the art of medicine, but I guess the art of being a caring human being, like seeing the person in front of you, figuring out what's going to be productive to tell them versus like what you maybe internally want to be screaming at them because you know what's best for them or think you know what's best for them. So I think being very conscious about like what is productive messaging to the person or the audience in front of you. And sometimes softer voices are stronger. And sometimes you just have to be like, no, fuck it, go whole hog and, go extreme carnivore for a reset. And then people realize, wow, this works and my life is transformed. It differs for different people. Are you a cold turkey person? Are you a weighed-in person? There's no right way. It's about like genuinely knowing yourself and just being committed to the journey, being committed to the process of saying, I'm going to try something honestly and openly. And then I'm going to evaluate, did it work for the outcome I care about? And if it didn't, then I'm not going to say I give up. I'm going to say, why didn't it work? What am I going to try next? And keep trying that. And you might find the extreme thing is best for you and makes you the happiest. You might. I did.
And part of this extreme thing is that what we're talking about here when we say carnivore, ketogenic, they're extreme compared to what the norm is. And the norm right now is broken.
Oh, yeah.
And what I'm trying to do with this part of the conversation is just show people what that extreme is on one end so they know what's possible to attempt. And depending how broken you are, how committed you are, there is this path, and Nick's taken it and continues to take it to put his condition in remission. And because it looks radical as you're seeing or hearing this right now, society right now is broken, and we don't want to look at that as being normal, because hopefully conversations like this can create a new normal and people can see a different path.
That's the mission, creating a new normal. It's a big mission. We'll see. I do see headwind for this movement, metabolic health movement, you could say. I think there's at least a growing cohort who are trying to define a new normal as being metabolically healthy, not as YOLOing your way through your diet in life, which you're right, that is the new normal, and it's entirely dysfunctional. It is dysfunctional what we feed patients in hospitals, what we feed children in schools. It's dysfunctional that we bribe for immunization with free donuts and burgers and French fries. It's dysfunctional that like sugary breakfast cereal is normal and marketed to kids. There's so many things that are dysfunctional. And on the individual level, if you have the power and confidence in your social circles to say, just because I'm going to get pressure to do this and just because society says this is normal, it's not the way I need to behave, that's fantastic. I admire people with that courage. It took me, let's say it took an extreme circumstance for me to have that mind shift. Because it's still awkward, I'll tell you. I'm a 29-year-old guy. My social circle is not keto. Most of them don't know my backstory. So if I go out, I'm not going to give them my whole backstory about like horrible blood diarrhea and being hospitalized. I'm just not drinking, and I'm generally not eating, or at least not eating carbs. And when you're with a pack of 20-year-olds, that raises eyebrows, especially when you're lean and healthy on the outside. So I won't shy away from the fact that those situations are awkward. They're uncomfortable. They continue to be. But I just make the decision that I know is best for me. And I will tell you, every day it's still hard. It's just very clear to me what the right decision is for me. And I think being a grown adult is just learning how to make the hard decisions, and, daily lifestyle decisions made consciously is in that cluster. So I won't tell people what's right or wrong for them, but I think being aware of that and that you're not alone. If you want to try something that appears extreme, maybe that's helpful. The nice thing is there's a lot of online communities that people can now join to feel supported.
I agree about that piece, not telling people what's right or wrong. It's just people in general haven't had the opportunity to see this other path.
Yeah.
And people like me and you are bringing a different conversation forth and showing a different route if people choose to take it.
Yeah. You will be supported by Jesse, by me, by our community. You don't need to go with what's societally normal, because societally normal right now results in normal health outcomes, and normal health outcomes are over 90% metabolically unhealthy. So
for somebody right now, metabolically unhealthy, overweight, no energy, saying, I'm ready to make a change, would you agree with me that diet, if all they have the bandwidth for right now is to make one shift, would you agree diet is the place to kick off?
Yeah. Diet's low-hanging fruit, no pun intended. Exercise is great. Sleep is definitely important. Don't get 2 hours of sleep a night, but diet's number one.
And for you along your journey and from what you've seen in the research, what other modalities, levers can you propose for people when they have the bandwidth to take that on besides diet?
I think all these things feed into one another. I do think that getting your sleep in order is key. It just provides you with energy. It balances your hormones, improves your mood. So as much as possible, and the sleep hygiene tips are pretty basic: dark, cool room, wind down before bed, try not to get bright light, especially blue light in your eyes at night, sort of thing. People differ. If you can be getting 7 hours, I think that's for most people pretty good. Sleep is definitely my Achilles heel and where I need to work. Sleep, and then exercise, and have it be something that you enjoy. If you're starting your journey, it doesn't need to be like an hour concerted at the gym per day. Just increase your activity. Find whatever lever you need to do to make that happen. If it's, counting your steps and trying to get 10,000 a day, great. If it's spending 2 days doing cardio of some form and then 2 days doing resistance training, great. I think more important than the actual exercise and activity is the momentum and the consistency. Make it part of your routine. You can always tweak the details later about what exactly you're doing. But when you go through your week or go through your day and it's just habit, we don't even have to think about it because you're just going to do it. If you just get up and go to the gym, there's no question. There's no willpower you need to exert because it's just part of your routine. That's a superpower. And then you can tweak the details later. So I don't care about the beginning, how many calories you're burning, what your lifts are relative to your body weight. It's just doing it. And once you build that habit, then you can iterate. So sleep, exercise, and then, of course, most of all, diet.
Nick, a week ago, you reached a huge accomplishment you've been working hard towards for a long time. You got your MD. So now you're a PhD MD. A huge congrats. I can only imagine the amount of work and what's gone into that. Let's talk about what that means for you now that that chapter is closed. What does that mean now that you have more bandwidth moving forward? Because you are doing so many things in the online world.
Yeah.
You're now, again, MD, PhD. What's the next chapter look like?
My next chapter looks... Oh, first of all, thank you for the kind words. It's definitely been a long road. And I do feel very happy and accomplished. Last Thursday, so a week ago today, was graduation, and it's still sinking in that I'm past that milestone because, quite honestly, my future looks so incredibly free and open beyond my wildest dreams. So to give some context, I grew up in a family of physicians, actually a family of MD PhDs. Both my parents are MD PhDs. And the path for an MD PhD, which is always what I imagined, is you go to the best college you can, you go to the best grad school you can, you go to the best med school you can. After you finish med school, so 4 years undergrad, a PhD, which can be anywhere 3 to 7 years, then med school, which is 4 years, then you go to residency. You train in residency depending on what you're doing for another 3 to 7 years. You might have fellowship another 2 years. So you're just in school until you're mid-30s. And then you're going to be attending and you're going to be working in a hospital and you're going to be doing all the right things, checking the right boxes, publishing papers, starting up a lab. Like I've seen this again and again secondhand. There's a lot of structure. And it's how prior generations did it. And it was the path that was laid out for me. It was a year ago this month. So this is June 2025. It was June 2024 when I made the very difficult decision that I wasn't going to apply to residency, which is atypical. It's very atypical to get off the treadmill at the end of medical school and not apply to residency. Because what that means, just to be clear, is that I cannot practice as a clinician. I am a medical doctor. I have an MD. But I will not go through the last step of training that will be required for me to, say, prescribe medications. So I have no plans to become a licensed clinician in that capacity. So the question that obviously arises is, well, why would I forego that opportunity? Look, I don't pat myself on the back too much, but to make very clear the options were open to me. I was valedictorian in my college, PhD from Oxford, went to Harvard Medical School. Like, I can get into a residency program pretty easily. And Harvard's quite a big feeder for the local hospitals. So it was an option that was there. The reason I decided not to do it is just because of the incredible things I've seen, in part through online, in my foray into being a public science communicator, which I started about a year and a half ago more seriously, and it has just taken off, even when I'm doing things mostly by myself at this point. I'm now starting to acquire a team, but mostly by myself over the arc of the last year and a half, and while being a full-time student. But what I'm realizing is, for me, I can have a much bigger impact by trying to empower people with education and enthusiasm and doing what you're doing here, just having conversations, inspiring people, and empowering individuals to change their own metabolic health journey. That scales. That is huge impact. And as much as I admire what my parents do, what my friends, my girlfriend does, and it's so incredibly important, treating patients in front of them, and I will have some clinical duties in the future. It's complicated, but medicine is a team sport. And as the sport evolves, you need new players with different skill sets in positions that play to their skill sets. And I think I'd be a fine clinician. I don't think I'd be a superstar clinician. I do think I can be a great public health educator. I'm very early on my journey. I'm 29 now. I started doing this about a year and a half ago. I plan to do this for the next 80-ish years. So I'm just excited about developing my skill set, learning different things, teaching people. And the feedback I've gotten thus far has just honestly been like, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm accomplishing my purpose, like what I'm built to do. And it makes me so happy to hear high school students or college students like saying I'm inspiring to go into biology or inspiring to go into medicine, or hearing from like 90-year-olds who are like, I'm picking up cell metabolism papers because of your videos and I'm getting excited about learning. Like, enthusiasm for metabolic health and learning about metabolic health is not discriminatory. It's all encompassing, and to see just how people have responded to enthusiastic education and the way their lives have transformed, including reversal of severe diseases, I want to commit myself to that public health education path, that advocacy path. And this was the thing that put the nail in the coffin of my decision. I mentioned earlier that medicine is driven by economics. Where the money is for drugs, there will be rigorous trials, which means metabolic health trials are really hard to get done rigorously. There's a lot I want to do, but I know the budget for them. 5 million, 10 million. And the idea that I would get that from like a pharma company or like an NIH grant is laughable. At least not for many decades with respect to the NIH grant. And even then I have to like fight tooth and nail for it. But you can find philanthropists. And if you're public, people like what you do, I'll say already, I won't name names, but there have been at least 3 billionaires that have come out of the woodwork, potentially interested in funding things I want to do over the next several years. Now, these projects will take time to get up, to develop the right teams, to execute. But in addition to changing the world through conversations and education, we do need rigorous research And we also need to find innovative ways to get that research done. So that's another element that I'm exploring, which I can explore best from the vantage point of a public health educator. Some might use the dirty word influencer. I don't care what you call me. I know what I'm about. I'm very excited. And I have now this incredible flexibility and privilege to get up and do whatever the heck I want every day. I can go travel and do a podcast in Chile, or I can just read about chlorogenic acid in coffee and write a newsletter. I can get in a podcast with you and just chat about whatever the heck we want. And yeah, I love it. I think it's providing value. Call that confirmation bias. I'll figure out exactly how I want to add value in the years to come. But right now, I'm kind of in that honeymoon period post-medical school, and that's where my mind is at. So I'm just happy. I'm excited. And I thank you for having me on, because this is part of my journey.
Keep up the great work. I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. Nick, round 2 has been a real pleasure. We're going to link up your website, your social media, everything in the show notes. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
Towards the end of college, I started developing GI upset with basically anything I ate. So I ended up becoming quite desperate, and after trying a bunch of medications that didn't end up really working to keep me in remission or help my symptoms, tried a bunch of different diets.